They say love is unconditional, but Grant Miller proved that conditions apply specifically a credit score and a bank balance. He looked his wife of 5 years in the eye while she was scraping pennies to buy bread and told her she was dead weight. He thought he was cutting loose a sinking ship to save himself. He signed the divorce papers with a smirk, believing he was trading up for a younger, richer model. What Grant didn't know was that 3 hours before he threw her out a signature in a lawyer's office in downtown Manhattan had just made his worthless wife the sole heir to the Anderson Vanderbilt estate. He wasn't divorcing a pauper. He was walking away from a $1.3 billion empire. And by the time he found out, it would be far, far too late. The heating had been off for 3 days. Inside the cramped one-bedroom apartment on 4th Street in South Philadelphia, Audrey Miller sat wrapped in 2 wool blankets, staring at the condensation dripping down the window pane. Her breath plumed in the air, a small, ghostly fog that vanished as quickly as her hope had over the last 6 months. On the table in front of her lay a stack of envelopes, each one stamped with aggressive red letters. Final notice, overdue, collection agency. Audrey rubbed her temples. She was 28, but in the dim grey light of the winter afternoon, she felt 50. It hadn't always been like this. 2 years ago, she and Grant had been the golden couple of their small circle. Grant had a promising startup in tech logistics, and Audrey worked as a graphic designer. But the market crashed. Grant's investors pulled out, and Audrey was laid off when her agency downsized. They had burned through their savings in 6 months. They sold the car. They moved into this shoebox apartment. And somewhere between the first overdraft fee and the selling of her grandmother's wedding ring, the love had drained out of Grant's eyes, replaced by a simmering resentment. The sound of a key scratching in the lock made her flinch. The door swung open, and Grant walked in. He brought a gust of freezing wind with him, along with the smell of expensive cologne, something that didn't belong in their current life. He wasn't wearing his worn-out parka. He was wearing a sharp navy blue peacoat, one she hadn't seen before. Grant. Audrey stood up, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Where were you? The landlord came by again. He said if we don't have the 600 by Friday, he's changing the locks. Grant didn't look at her. He carefully hung his new coat on the rack, smoothing out the shoulders with a meticulousness that made Audrey's stomach turn. He turned around, his face blank, his eyes cold and hard like flint. I handled the landlord, Grant said, his voice devoid of emotion. I told him I'm moving out. Audrey blinked, the words not quite registering. We're moving out. Where are we going? Grant, did you find a cheaper place, or did you get the loan? Grant laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the empty room. He walked over to the table and swept the stack of overdue bills onto the floor with a violent swipe of his hand. Not we, Audrey. Me. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the table where the bills had been. I'm done, he said. I'm done with the poverty. I'm done with the penny pinching. And I am done with you dragging me down. Audrey stared at the envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Grant, her voice trembled. We promised, for richer or for poorer. We're just in a rough patch. I have an interview tomorrow at the diner on Main, and... A diner? Grant sneered, his lip curling in disgust. You think I want to be married to a waitress? I'm an entrepreneur, Audrey. I have vision. I have potential. And you're just an anchor. He took a step closer, looming over her. I met someone who actually understands success. Chloe isn't counting coupons, Audrey. Her father owns the dealership where I've been consulting. She believes in me. The air left Audrey's lungs. Chloe, that intern you told me not to worry about. She's not an intern anymore, Grant said smoothly. She's my partner, in every sense, and she doesn't want me carrying baggage. Audrey felt a tear slide down her cold cheek. I'm baggage. I supported you for 3 years while you built that company. I paid the rent when you had 0 revenue. I sold my jewelry so you could buy a server. And look where it got us, Grant shouted, gesturing to the freezing apartment. Nowhere. You're bad luck, Audrey. Everything you touch turns to dust. I need a fresh start, and that starts with cutting you loose. He tapped the papers. Sign them. I want a clean break. No alimony, no division of assets. Not that we have any assets to divide. Just sign it and I'll give you $500 to help you move your junk out. $500? Audrey whispered. Grant, I have nowhere to go. My parents are gone. I have no family. Not my problem, Grant said, checking his watch, a new Apple Watch she noticed. Chloe is waiting in the car. It's a Mercedes, by the way. Heated seats. You should see it. The cruelty was so casual, so easy for him. It broke something inside Audrey. Not her heart, that was already shattered, but her fear. A cold resolve replaced it. She picked up the pen lying on the table. Her hand shook not from sadness, but from a sudden white-hot rage. You want me gone? She asked quietly. Yesterday, Grant replied. Fine. She signed the papers. The scratch of the pen was the only sound in the room. She didn't read the clauses. She didn't care. She just wanted him out of her sight. She pushed the papers back to him. Take them, and get out. Grant snatched the papers, checking the signature with a satisfied smirk. He reached into his pocket, pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills, and threw them at her. They fluttered down like dead leaves, landing on the dirty linoleum. Smart choice, he said. Good luck with the diner job, Audrey. Try not to mess up the coffee orders. He turned on his heel and walked out. The door slammed shut, rattling the window frame. Audrey stood in the silence, the money lying at her feet. She didn't pick it up. She sank onto the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and sobbed until her throat was raw. She was alone. She was broke. She was divorced. She had hit rock bottom. Or so she thought. 2 days later, Audrey was packing her few belongings into cardboard boxes she had scavenged from the back of a supermarket. The landlord had given her until noon to vacate. She had nowhere to go. A women's shelter on the 22nd Street had said they might have a bed, but it was first come, first served. She taped up the last box containing her sketchbooks and a few framed photos of her parents who had died in a car accident when she was 10. She had been raised in the foster system, bounced from house to house until she aged out. Grant had been the first person she thought was permanent. A sharp knock on the door made her jump. The landlord, she thought. He's early. She wiped her dusty hands on her jeans and opened the door, preparing to beg for another hour. But it wasn't the landlord. Standing in the hallway was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a magazine spread for high-end corporate law. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair combed back impeccably. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that probably cost more than Audrey had earned in her entire life. He held a leather briefcase and peered at her through rimless glasses. Mrs. Audrey Miller, he asked. His voice was deep, cultured, and polite. It's just Audrey now, she said warily, holding the door tight. If you're looking for Grant, he doesn't live here, anymore. And if you're a debt collector, you're wasting your time. There's nothing to take." The man offered a small, kindly smile. "I am not a debt collector, Audrey. My name is Arthur Sterling. I am the senior partner at Sterling Halloway and Associates, based in New York City. May I come in?" Audrey hesitated. "I'm moving out. The place is a mess." "That is quite all right," Mr. Sterling said. "This concerns a matter of urgent importance regarding your biological lineage." Audrey frowned. "My lineage? My parents died years ago. I don't have any family." "That," Mr. Sterling said, stepping into the room as she stepped back, "is what you were led to believe, but it is not the entire truth." He didn't look around at the squalor with judgment. Instead, he looked at Audrey with a strange mixture of pity and respect. He set his briefcase on the wobbly table, snapped the gold latches open, and pulled out a thick document bound in blue velvet. "Audrey, are you familiar with the name Archibald Anderson?" Audrey shook her head. "No. Should I be—" "Archibald Anderson," Sterling began, "was a real estate mogul who owned roughly 30% of the commercial skyline in Seattle, along with significant holdings in Manhattan and London. He was known as the Silent Tycoon. He passed away 3 weeks ago." "I'm sorry to hear that," Audrey said, confused. "But what does that have to do with me?" Sterling took a breath. "Archibald Anderson was your maternal grandfather." The room spun. Audrey grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "That's impossible. My mother she was a secretary. She never mentioned a tycoon father. She said her parents were dead." "She ran away," Sterling corrected gently. "She fell in love with your father, a struggling artist, and Archibald disapproved. He was a hard man, Audrey. Controlling. Your mother chose love over money and cut all ties. Archibald was too proud to chase her. But when she died in that crash, he hired private investigators to find her child. He knew about me." Audrey's voice rose. "He knew I was in foster care. He knew I was sleeping in group homes with rats in the walls, and he did nothing." "He tried," Sterling said, "but due to a clerical error in the state system and your mother's use of an alias, he lost your trail. It took us 18 years to find you. We finally confirmed your identity last week through a DNA match from a medical procedure you had at the city clinic." Audrey stared at him. The betrayal of her grandfather leaving her in the system stung, but the reality of the moment was pressing in. "Okay," she said slowly. "So he's my grandfather. And he's dead. Did he leave me a letter or something?" Sterling's eyes twinkled behind his glasses. "He left you more than a letter, Audrey. Archibald never remarried. He had no other children. In his final years, his greatest regret was losing his daughter. His will is ironclad and very specific." Sterling slid the blue document toward her. "As the sole living descendant of Archibald Anderson, you are the sole beneficiary of the Anderson Trust." Audrey looked at the papers, the legal jargon swimming before her eyes. "Beneficiary? Does that mean... Is there some money?" She was hoping for $10,000. Maybe 20. Enough to get an apartment, buy a used car. Maybe go back to school. Mr. Sterling paused for effect. "The portfolio includes the Anderson Tower in Seattle, the Kensington Residential Complex in London, 3 logistics hubs in California, and liquid assets in the Swiss bank UBS." He adjusted his glasses. "After taxes, the total value of the inheritance is approximately $1.3 billion. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and deafening. Audrey didn't scream. She didn't faint. She simply stopped breathing for a solid 10 seconds. "Billion," she whispered. "With a B." "With a B," Sterling confirmed. "And there is one more thing. The transfer of ownership was triggered the moment we located you. Technically, as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, you are already the owner. I have a black card here linked to your preliminary expense account. It has a limit of $5 million. He placed a sleek, heavy metal card on the table next to the divorce papers she had signed just 48 hours ago. Audrey stared at the card. Then she looked at the empty spot where Grant had stood when he threw the $500 at her. Does anyone else know about this?" Audrey asked, her mind racing. "No," Sterling said. "Privacy was Archibald's obsession. The will is sealed. The press doesn't know. Only you and my firm know." Audrey's hand hovered over the black card. She thought about Grant. She thought about his sneer. She thought about Chloe and the heated seats in the Mercedes. She thought about the hard wait comment. "Mr. Sterling," Audrey said, a new light igniting in her eyes. A dangerous light. "If I were to buy a specific building in this city, say the one housing a certain luxury car dealership, how fast could that happen?" Sterling smiled, and for a lawyer, it was a surprisingly wicked smile. "With your resources, Ms. Anderson, pardon me, Ms. Miller, we could likely close by the end of the day." Audrey picked up the card. It felt cold and heavy like a weapon. "Don't call me Miller," she said. "Call me Ms. Anderson. And Mr. Sterling, I'm going to need a ride to the Mercedes dealership. I have some shopping to do." The transition from the cold, drafty apartment in South Philly to the penthouse suite at the Rittenhouse Hotel was jarring. Audrey stood in the center of the marble foyer, staring at her reflection in a gold-leaf mirror. The woman looking back was gaunt, pale, and dressed in frayed jeans, but her eyes held a fire that hadn't been there before. Mr. Sterling stood by the door, scrolling through his tablet. "I have arranged for a personal shopper, a stylist, and a nutritionist to meet us here in an hour," Sterling said. "But first we have business. The board of Anderson Holdings is in a panic. They've been without a leader for 3 weeks. They expect you to sell." Audrey turned. "Sell why?" "Because they assume you are inexperienced," Sterling said delicately. "They want to liquidate the assets, take their golden parachutes and run. There is a board meeting scheduled for Friday in New York. If you don't show up, they will vote to dissolve the trust." "I'll be there," Audrey said, "but not as Audrey Miller. That woman is dead." Over the next 48 hours, Audrey underwent a transformation that was surgical in its precision. It wasn't about vanity. It was about weaponizing her appearance. The mousy brown hair was dyed a rich, dark chocolate and cut into a sharp, angular bob that screamed authority. The worn-out denim was replaced by tailored Armani suits, structured blazers, and Louboutin heels that clicked against the floor like gunshots. But the real transformation happened in the war room Sterling had set up in the suite. Audrey spent 16 hours a day poring over the portfolios. She had a degree in design, but she had a mind for patterns. She saw what the board didn't. She saw the undervalued properties in the meat-packing district. She saw the bloated management fees in the London branch. "This company is bleeding cash in maintenance fees," Audrey muttered on the second night, pointing at a spreadsheet. "Who owns the maintenance subsidiary?" Sterling looked over her shoulder. "A shell company called Apex Services. It's owned by, let me check. Silas Thorne, one of your board members. He's billing his own company 3 times the market rate to clean his own buildings." Audrey said, her voice hard. "He's stealing from me." It appears so, Sterling noted. He's also the one pushing hardest for you to sell. We'll deal with him, Audrey said. But first I want to know about Grant. Sterling hesitated. I advised against looking back, Ms. Anderson. I'm not looking back, Arthur. I'm looking at my investments. She slid a file across the marble table. I did some digging. Grant's startup, Logitech, just secured a new office space to impress his new investors. Where is it? Sterling tapped his screen. It says here they just signed a lease for the 40th floor of the Zephyr Tower in Center City. Audrey smiled. It was a cold, humorless smile. The Zephyr Tower. That's one of ours, isn't it? It is, Sterling confirmed. We acquired it in the merger last year. And who manages the lease agreements for that building? The regional director. But ultimately, you have veto power over any commercial lease above 10,000 square feet. Audrey stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Grant was probably celebrating with Chloe drinking champagne bought with the money he'd saved by kicking her out. Grant's lease, Audrey said softly. Is it finalized? It's in the grace period, signed by the management company, but pending final owner approval, usually a formality. Not anymore, Audrey said. Don't cancel it. That's too easy. I want to add a clause, a moral turpitude clause, and I want the rent tripled if the tenant fails a financial audit. Grant cooked his books to get that lease, Sterling guessed. Grant cooks everything, Audrey replied. Let him move in. Let him get comfortable. Let him invite his investors. And then, bring me the eviction notice. She turned back to Sterling. Now tell me about this charity gala tomorrow night at the Museum of Art. I see my grandfather's company is a platinum sponsor. Yes, Sterling said. It's the Innovators Ball. The entire business elite of Philadelphia will be there, including, I suspect, anyone looking for capital. Get me a ticket, Audrey said, and get me the red dress. The Innovators' Ball was a sea of black tuxedos and pastel gowns. The air smelled of expensive lilies and desperation. This was where the sharks swam looking for smaller fish to eat. Grant Miller stood near the open bar, one hand wrapped around a whiskey sour, the other resting possessively on the small of Chloe's back. Chloe looked stunning in a silver sequined dress, though she looked bored. Are you sure the investor is coming? Chloe asked, checking her phone. My dad said he could get us a meeting with the VP of Chase, but we need big money, Grant. Series A funding. He'll be here, Grant said, scanning the room. I heard rumors that a representative from the Anderson Trust is coming. Do you know how big they are? If I can just get 5 minutes with them, Logitech goes global. And then, babe, we are buying a house in the Hamptons. I still think it's risky, Chloe said, moving into that massive office before we have the funding secured. You have to fake it to make it, Grant said with a wink. Perception is reality. We look successful, so we become successful. Besides, I cut the dead weight. My luck is turning. He was about to take a sip of his drink when the room suddenly went quiet. The chatter at the tables died down. The string quartet seemed to falter. Heads turned toward the grand staircase. Walking down the stairs was a vision. She wore a blood-red silk gown that clung to her figure like a second skin with a slit that ran up to her thigh. Diamonds, real heavy. Vintage diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. Her dark hair was sharp, her makeup flawless. She moved with a predatory grace, flanked by 2 large security guards and a silver-haired man in a suit. Grant choked on his drink. Who is that? Chloe whispered, her eyes narrowing in jealousy. Grant stared. The woman looked familiar. Painfully familiar. The arch of the brow, the shape of the chin. But it couldn't be. The woman he knew wore oversized sweaters, and smelled like cheap laundry detergent. The woman he knew had sad, tired eyes and cracked hands from washing dishes. This woman looked like she owned the air everyone else was breathing. I don't know," Grant stammered. The woman reached the bottom of the stairs and was immediately swarmed by the city's elite. The mayor was shaking her hand. The CEO of Comcast was bowing his head. "Let's go find out," Chloe said, pulling Grant toward the crowd. They pushed their way through the circle of admirers. Grant adjusted his tie, putting on his best salesman smile. "Excuse me," Grant said, shouldering past a waiter. "Grant Miller, CEO of Logitech." The woman turned. For a moment, the world stopped. Grant found himself looking into eyes that were dark, deep, and utterly terrifying. "Hello, Grant," she said. Her voice was smooth, rich, and icy. Grant's jaw dropped. "Audrey—" A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. "He knows her." "Who is she?" Chloe stiffened. "This is Audrey, the ex-wife." She looked Audrey up and down, ready to sneer, but found she couldn't. Audrey's dress alone cost more than Chloe's father's dealership. "You look—" Grant struggled to find the words. "You look different." "I imagine $1 billion does wonders for the complexion," Audrey said casually. Grant blinked. "What? Allow me to introduce myself properly," she said, raising her voice slightly so the surrounding investors could hear. "I am Audrey Anderson, chairwoman and sole owner of the Anderson Trust." The crowd gasped. The Anderson Trust was a myth, a titan of industry. Grant's face drained of color. "Anderson. But you're Miller. You're an orphan." "I was," Audrey corrected, "until I found out who I really was. Just a few days after you threw me out, actually." She took a step closer, invading his personal space. The scent of her perfume, jasmine and oud, filled his nose. "It's funny, Grant," she said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "You always said you wanted to marry a woman with potential. A woman who could bring something to the table." "Audrey, wait." Grant started, sweat beading on his forehead. His mind was racing. $1 billion. If they were still married, if he hadn't signed those papers, half of that would be his. Half. "We can talk about this. I was under a lot of stress. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Audrey laughed. "No, Grant. You made a calculation. You calculated that I was a liability. You bet against me." She signaled to a waiter who handed her a glass of champagne. "By the way," she said, taking a sip, "I saw the paperwork for your new office at the Zephyr Tower. The 40th floor. Beautiful view." "Yes." Grant seized the opening, desperate to pivot. "It's amazing. We're going to do great things there. Maybe the Anderson Trust could come in as a lead investor. For old times' sake." Chloe tugged on Grant's arm, realizing the danger, but he shook her off. He was looking at the money. Audrey swirled her wine. "I don't invest in companies with bad leadership, Grant. Oh, and about that lease." She leaned in her voice, dropping to a whisper that only he and Chloe could hear. "I own the Zephyr Tower." Grant froze. "And I reviewed your application," Audrey continued. "You claimed to have liquid capital of $200,000, but my auditors found that you took a high-interest loan from a shark in Jersey to pad the account just for the verification check. That's fraud, Grant." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her clutch. "This is a lease termination notice. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. If you're not out, I'll have security throw your servers off the balcony." She shoved the paper into the breast pocket of his cheap blazer. Audrey, please. Grant's voice cracked loud enough to draw stares. You can't do this. I have investors coming tomorrow. If I don't have an office, they'll walk. Not my problem, Audrey said, echoing the exact words he had said to her in the apartment. She turned to the crowd, her face brightening into a charming smile. Now who wants to talk about the new urban development project in the Navy Yard? The crowd instantly turned their backs on Grant, forming a tight circle around Audrey. He was left standing on the outside, the termination notice burning a hole in his pocket, while the woman he had called dead weight held the world in the palm of her hand. Chloe looked at Grant, then at Audrey, and then back at Grant. You idiot, Chloe hissed. You told me she was a nobody. She was, Grant cried. Well, now she's a billionaire, Chloe snapped, and you're just a guy with no office and a fraud investigation waiting to happen. She unhooked her arm from his. I'm taking the Mercedes. You can Uber home. As Chloe stormed off, and the laughter of the rich and powerful echoed around him, Grant watched Audrey Anderson shine like a diamond. And for the first time in his life, he realized exactly how much his arrogance had cost him. But Audrey wasn't done. This was just the opening move. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Anderson Tower, turning the building into a pillar of fire. On the top floor, in a boardroom that cost more to furnish than most neighborhoods, 12 men sat around a long mahogany table. They were the board of directors for the Anderson Trust. They were old, rich, and impatient. At the head of the table sat an empty chair. This is ridiculous, spat Silas Varick, a man with a thick neck and eyes like a shark. He checked his gold Rolex. She's 10 minutes late. I told you, Sterling. The girl is a waitress. She's probably overwhelmed trying to pick out which shoes to wear. We need to vote on the liquidation proposal now. The meeting is scheduled for 9:00 a.m., Silas, Arthur Sterling said calmly from his seat. It is 8:58. She has no experience, Varick continued, addressing the other nervous board members. Do you really want a billion-dollar empire run by someone who was serving coffee last week? Archibald is dead. The market is shaky. We sell the assets, we take our payout, and we wash our hands of this. The doors burst open. Audrey Anderson walked in. She wasn't wearing the glamorous red dress from the gala. She was wearing a sharp charcoal business suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She held a single black folder. She didn't look at the men. She walked straight to the head of the table, pulled out the heavy leather chair, and sat down. Silence descended on the room. Good morning, gentlemen, Audrey said. She didn't smile. Varick leaned back, crossing his arms. Ms. Anderson. Nice of you to join us. I was just explaining to the board that given your unique background, it might be best if you remained a silent partner. Leave the heavy lifting to the experts. Experts? Audrey asked. She opened her folder. Is that what you call yourself, Mr. Varick? I have been on this board for 20 years, Varick sneered. I knew your grandfather. He trusted me. He trusted you to manage the maintenance contracts for our residential properties, Audrey said, pulling out a sheet of paper. Which is why I found it interesting that for the last 5 years, we've been paying a company called Apex Services 40% above market rate for repairs that, according to tenant complaints, are rarely done. Varick's face twitched. Inflation. Labor costs. Apex Services. Audrey continued, her voice rising slightly. Is registered in the Cayman Islands, but the signatory for the bank account is a Martha Varick. That's your wife, isn't it, Silas? The room went deadly quiet. The other board members shifted in their seats, looking from Audrey to Varick. That's a conflict of interest explanation I can provide, Varick stammered, sweat breaking out on his upper lip. It was a temporary measure to ensure quality control. It's embezzlement, Audrey corrected. I had Mr. Sterling run a forensic audit last night. You've siphoned approximately $12 million from this company over the last decade. Varick stood up, slamming his hand on the table. You can't talk to me like that. I built this company. You're just a lucky little girl who won the genetic lottery. You don't know how this world works. Audrey remained seated. She pressed a button on the intercom. Security. 2 large men in black suits entered the room instantly. Mr. Varick is leaving, Audrey said coolly. Permanently. His shares are hereby frozen pending a criminal investigation. Please escort him out. You can't do this, Varick screamed as the guards grabbed his arms. I'll sue you, I'll destroy you. You can try, Audrey said, finally looking him in the eye. But you're going to need a very expensive lawyer, and since I just froze your assets, good luck finding one. As Varick was dragged out, shouting profanities, the remaining 11 board members sat in stunned silence. They looked at the young woman at the head of the table with a newfound fear. Audrey smoothed out her blazer and looked around the table. Now, does anyone else have a shell company they'd like to tell me about? Or can we get to business? One by one, the men shook their heads, sitting up straighter. Good, Audrey said. We aren't selling. In fact, we're buying. I want to look into acquiring the distressed properties in the Navy Yard. I have a feeling the city is about to rezone that district. Let's get to work. For the next 2 hours, Audrey led the meeting with a precision that bordered on terrifying. She had done her homework. She knew the numbers. By the time the meeting adjourned, she hadn't just claimed her inheritance. She had claimed her throne. But as she walked back to her office, Sterling fell into step beside her. That was impressive, he said. Brutal, but impressive. However, we have a problem. What now? Audrey asked, rubbing her temples. It's Grant, Sterling said quietly. He's been busy. Grant Miller sat in the dingy office of a strip mall lawyer named Saul Pawson. The office smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap coffee. It was a far cry from the high-rise firms Grant used to dream of. But Saul Pawson had a reputation. He was a pit bull who didn't care about ethics. So let me get this straight, Saul said, leaning over his cluttered desk, his yellowing eyes gleaming. You signed the divorce papers on the 15th, but you didn't file them with the court until the 17th. I was busy, Grant lied. I forgot to drop them off for 2 days. And the grandfather died. When? 3 weeks ago, Grant said. So technically, when the old man kicked the bucket, Audrey and I were still happily married, legally speaking. Saul grinned, revealing crooked teeth. Mr. Miller, you might have just won the lottery. In this state, inheritance received during a marriage is generally considered separate property. Unless what? Grant leaned in, desperate. Unless we can prove that she knew about the inheritance and concealed it to induce you to sign the divorce papers. That's fraud. Fraudulent inducement. If we can prove she tricked you, we can get the divorce agreement thrown out. Then we file for a new divorce and we demand equitable distribution of the marital assets. Marital assets, Grant whispered, which now includes the $1.3 billion. Exactly, Saul said. We don't need to win a trial. We just need to make enough noise that she settles. A woman like that knew money trying to build a reputation. She won't want a messy public trial where she looks like a con artist who duped her poor, struggling husband. Grant sat back, a slow smile spreading across his face. She humiliated me, Saul. She kicked me out of my office. She turned the whole city against me. I want her to pay. Oh, she'll pay. Saul chuckled. Sign here. We're going to sue her for $500 million. 3 days later, Audrey was in the middle of a site inspection at a construction zone in West Philly when her phone blew up. First, it was a text from Sterling, check the news. Now. Then a notification from Twitter, #billionaire scam, trending. Audrey opened the link. A tabloid headline screamed in bold letters, "Heiress or con artist, Audrey Anderson, accused of hiding billions to dump broke husband." The article was vicious. It painted Grant as a sympathetic, hard-working entrepreneur who had supported his wife for years only to be ruthlessly discarded the moment she struck gold. It claimed Audrey had known about the money for weeks and had tricked Grant into a quickie divorce to avoid sharing the wealth. "Unbelievable," Audrey muttered, her hand shaking with rage. She rushed back to the car. "Get me to Sterling's office. Fast!" When she arrived, the atmosphere was tense. Sterling was on the phone, yelling at a publisher. He slammed the receiver down when Audrey walked in. "He's filed a suit," Sterling said grimly. "He's claiming fraudulent inducement. He wants half Audrey, and the press is eating it up. The narrative is perfect for them, the cold-hearted rich woman crushing the little guy." "He's lying." Audrey paced the room. "He threw me out. He didn't know about the money, and neither did I. You came to my apartment 2 days after he left." "I know that," Sterling said, "but the public doesn't, and the courts move slowly. Grant is banking on you settling to make it go away. He knows this will freeze your ability to make new deals. The board is already calling me. They're panicked. Varick is probably feeding Grant information too." Audrey walked to the window. She looked down at the city she now owned a piece of. She thought about Grant's smirk when he threw those $500 at her. She thought about him trying to destroy her reputation just to get a payout he didn't earn. "He wants a fight?" Audrey asked softly. "He wants a settlement," Sterling said. "He's asking for $50 million to drop the suit." Audrey turned around. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. "No." "Audrey, the legal fees alone." "I said no." Audrey cut him off. "I'm not giving him a dime. He wants a public spectacle. Fine. I'll give him one." She walked over to Sterling's desk. "Do you still have the surveillance footage from the hallway of my old apartment building?" Sterling paused. "The private investigators pulled it when we were verifying your identity, just to confirm your residence. Yes, we have it." "Does it have audio?" "It's a cheap building, Audrey. Probably just video. Why?" "Because," Audrey said, her mind working furiously. "Grant made a mistake. He said in the lawsuit that I tricked him into signing. He said I came to him with the papers." "Yes, that's his claim. But the video will show him coming to the apartment with the papers in his hand. It will show him entering, staying for 10 minutes and leaving. And wait." Audrey remembered something. "When he left," Audrey said slowly, "he threw money at me. But he dropped the keys. He dropped his apartment key on the floor and kicked it towards me before he walked out. I remember hearing it slide." "Okay," Sterling said, unsure where she was going. "If he kicked the key to me," Audrey said, "it means he surrendered residency. He abandoned the marital home before he knew about the money. That proves intent to leave regardless of finances." "It helps," Sterling admitted. "But it's not a smoking gun." "I have the smoking gun," Audrey said. She pulled out her phone. "Chloe." "The mistress." "Grant dumped her the night of the gala when he realized I was rich," Audrey said. "He left her in the parking lot. I saw her crying near the valet stand." Audrey scrolled through her contacts. She had done a little digging of her own after the gala. "Grant thinks everyone has a price," Audrey said. "He's right. But he forgets that loyalty is expensive and he's broke. She hit the call button. Hello. Is this Chloe? Don't hang up. This is Audrey. I think you and I have a mutual problem named Grant. How would you like to make $1 million legally by telling the truth in court? Audrey looked at Sterling and smiled. Set up a press conference for tomorrow morning, Arthur. Grant wants to tell a story. Let's tell the real one. The Superior Court of Pennsylvania was packed to the rafters. The air conditioning struggled to keep up with the body heat of 100 reporters, curious onlookers and legal aides who had crammed into the mahogany-paneled room. Grant Miller sat at the plaintiff's table, looking the part of the aggrieved husband. He wore a modest, slightly ill-fitting suit, a calculated move by his lawyer, Saul Pawson, to make him look like the underdog fighting the billionaire heiress. On the other side of the aisle, Audrey sat next to Arthur Sterling. She looked impeccable in a navy blue skirt suit, her posture rigid, her face unreadable. She didn't look at Grant. She looked at the judge, the Honorable Justice Vance. Wait, no, Vance, per instructions, Justice Halloway. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. Justice Halloway, a stern woman with steel-grey hair and zero tolerance for theatrics, took the bench. Be seated. We are here for the matter of Miller v. Anderson. Mr. Pawson, you may proceed with your opening statement. Saul Pawson stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked toward the jury box, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. Ladies and gentlemen, Pawson began, gesturing to Grant, who hung his head sorrowfully. This is a simple case of deceit. My client, a hard-working man, was manipulated. His wife, Audrey Anderson, knew she had inherited a fortune. She knew that if she divorced him quietly, she could keep it all. So she played on his emotions. She pretended to be poor. She induced him to sign a separation agreement under false pretenses. This isn't just about money. It's about justice. It's about a billionaire trying to cheat a common man out of his marital rights. Grant wiped a non-existent tear from his eye. The jury looked sympathetic. Then it was Arthur Sterling's turn. He didn't walk to the jury. He stood behind his desk, leaning on his knuckles, his voice booming. We will prove today, Sterling said, that Mr. Miller was not a victim of fraud. He was a victim of his own greed. He abandoned his wife in the dead of winter because he believed she was of no value to him. He initiated the divorce. He demanded it. And now that he realizes the dead weight he cut loose is made of gold, he wants it back. This isn't justice, ladies and gentlemen. It's a robbery. The cross-examination. The trial moved quickly. Grant took the stand first. He stuck to his script perfectly. He claimed he loved Audrey, that the divorce was a heat-of-the-moment mistake, and that if he had known about the inheritance, he would have fought harder to save the marriage. I just wanted us to be secure, Grant sobbed slightly. If I knew she had that money, I wouldn't have worried about the bills. We could have been happy. Then Sterling stood up for cross-examination. Mr. Miller, Sterling said, holding a piece of paper. You claim you initiated the divorce because of financial stress, is that correct? Yes, Grant said. The pressure was too much. And you claim you didn't know about the inheritance until after the divorce was finalized. I had no idea. She hid it from me. I see. Sterling walked to the evidence table. I would like to submit Exhibit C into evidence. This is a text message log retrieved from your phone provider. Grant froze. He looked at Saul, who frowned. Mr. Miller, Sterling continued, at 4:00 p.m. on the day you served Audrey with divorce papers, you sent a text to a contact listed as Chloe. Would you mind reading the highlighted section for the court? Grant stared at the paper. His throat went dry. "Read it, Mr. Miller," Justice Halloway ordered. Grant's voice shook. It says, "Going to drop the bomb on Audrey tonight. Can't wait to get that anchor off my neck. Champagne is on ice, baby." A murmur went through the courtroom. "Anchor," Sterling repeated. Interesting choice of words for a man who claims he wanted to save his marriage. "And who is Chloe?" A colleague," Grant stammered. "A colleague?" Sterling smiled dangerously. "Well, let's ask her. The defense calls Ms. Chloe Evans to the stand." The nail in the coffin. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Grant's face turned the color of ash. Chloe Evans walked in. She wasn't looking at Grant with admiration anymore. She looked furious. She took the stand, swore the oath, and sat down, glaring at Grant. "Ms. Evans," Sterling said gently, "what was your relationship with Mr. Miller on the date in question?" "We were having an affair," Chloe said bluntly. The courtroom gasped. "He told me he was leaving Audrey because she was broke and embarrassing. He said he needed to upgrade to someone who fit his future." "Did he ever mention anything about Audrey having money?" "No," Chloe scoffed. "He laughed about how poor she was. He told me he threw $500 at her just to make her feel small. He said, and I quote, 'She's worthless.'" Grant sank lower in his chair, burying his face in his hands. The jury was no longer looking at him with sympathy. They were looking at him with disgust. "And why are you testifying today, Ms. Evans?" Sterling asked. "Because he tried to use me too," Chloe said, her voice trembling with anger. "He promised me a future, but the second he found out Audrey was rich, he dumped me in a parking lot to chase after her money. Grant Miller doesn't love anyone but himself." "No further questions," Sterling said. The verdict. The closing arguments were a formality. Saul Pawson tried to salvage the case, but the damage was done. The jury deliberated for less than 20 minutes. When they returned, the foreman stood up. "In the matter of Miller v. Anderson regarding the claim of fraudulent inducement, we find in favor of the defendant, Audrey Anderson." Audrey let out a breath she had been holding for weeks. Sterling squeezed her shoulder. But Justice Halloway wasn't finished. She peered over her glasses at Grant. "Mr. Miller, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a frivolous and malicious abuse of the court system. You abandoned your wife when she was destitute, and you sought to exploit her when she succeeded. You are ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees in full, amounting to $250,000. Grant's head snapped up. I don't have that kind of money." "Then I suggest you find a job," the judge said coldly. "Case dismissed." The final encounter. Audrey walked out of the courthouse and onto the wide stone steps. The winter sun was shining bright, crisp, and clean. Reporters shouted her name, cameras flashing like lightning, but security held them back. At the bottom of the steps, Grant was waiting. He looked ruined. His tie was undone, his hair messy. He looked like the desperate man he had tried to make Audrey into. He saw her and took a step forward. "Audrey," he rasped. Audrey stopped. She signaled her security to pause. She stood 2 steps above him, looking down. "Audrey, please." Grant begged, his voice cracking. "I'm ruined. The judge, the fees. I'll go bankrupt. You have billions. You can make this go away. Please, for the sake of what we used to have." Audrey looked at him. She remembered the cold apartment. She remembered the fear of being homeless. She remembered the person she used to be, the girl who thought she needed him to survive. "What we used to have," Audrey said softly, "was a lie. You loved a version of me that made you feel superior. and the moment I needed you, you threw me away." "I'm sorry," Grant wept. "I was stupid. I see my mistake now." "You don't see a mistake, Grant," Audrey said, her voice hard as steel. "You see a bank account." She reached into her purse. Grant's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. Was she going to write him a check? Audrey pulled out a single $5 bill. She walked down the steps and tucked it into the breast pocket of his suit. "Here," she said. "This is for the bus. Try not to mess up the coffee orders at your next job." She turned her back on him and walked toward the waiting black limousine. Sterling held the door open for her. "Where to, Miss Anderson?" the driver asked. Audrey looked out the window as the car pulled away, leaving Grant Miller standing alone on the sidewalk, a small, shrinking figure in her rearview mirror. "The Anderson Tower," Audrey smiled. "I have an emperor to run." Grant Miller spent the rest of his life chasing the ghost of the fortune he threw away. He filed for bankruptcy 6 months later and moved back to his parents' basement, forever known as the man who fumbled a billion-dollar bag for a cheap ego boost. Audrey, on the other hand, didn't just survive. She thrived. She turned the Anderson Trust into a global force for good, launching the Second Chance Foundation to help women get back on their feet after financial abuse. The moral of the story: be careful who you step on when you're climbing the ladder, because you never know who you might meet on the way back down. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new story. What would you have done in Audrey's shoes? Would you have given Grant a dime? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.